with that.
I appreciate that, Mina. I appreciate all the words. Me and Mina have been buddies for a few years now, and like the family and stuff like that. And so I really appreciate the invitation to be with you all. Just actually, Mina's the only one on video. Everybody can hear me. If you can't hear me, just shout in the chat or in the chat or whatever. So I think everyone can hear me. And I didn't know how many people were going to be on here, and I didn't know kind of the structure, but I would love to have a conversation. And like Mina said, Mina kind of puffed it up a little bit. I'm going to share what we do here in DC and kind of what we've been, some of our experience here, but by no means have we figured out really anything. We're just kind of doing our thing, but I would love to have a conversation because what I'm also seeing is people are experiencing so many different things right now. The world is as chaotic as it's ever been. I described it to somebody as, and again, I don't know who's a history buff here, but I like to dabble in history. And we are experiencing 1918, 1929, and 1968 all in 6 months between a pandemic, an economic crash, and civil unrest. And so the world is in a chaotic state, and there's no better time for the church than right now. I mean, this is a moment. And if I get a little heated and I get a little passionate, you forgive me, because this is what I do for a living, okay? This topic makes me very, very, very excited. Seeing young, old, young Orthodox people care about this topic means a lot to me, because this is something that I've been super passionate about for several years. And I always talk, whenever I talk to the volunteers, I talk about the story of Queen Esther, and I love the story of Queen Esther. And y'all know the story of Queen Esther, where she gets married to the king, and the king's a bad guy, and he's about to wipe out all the Jews. And then Uncle Mordecai comes and tells her, say, hey, you got to intercede. You have the king's ear. He loves you. He doesn't know you're Jew, so please intercede for the Jews. And she's afraid to do it. She's scared. She doesn't know what to do. And then Uncle Mordecai says the famous lines. He says, who knows, for God has brought you here for such a time as this. I love that. And I always tell the volunteers that I feel like God has brought the church, the Orthodox Church, the Coptic Church, to these communities for such a time as this. And so if we don't rise up during this time, I don't know what'll happen, and I don't want to find out. So again, I got some thoughts I want to share with you, but really I'd love to have a conversation and kind of we can chat after and during. If you got any questions or whatever, feel free to interrupt me at any time. But the number one question I get, so Mina just said that I run a nonprofit organization called Hope Multiplied, which is a community service organization that we started when we started the church at STSA in 2012. We started this to be the community service arm of the church. And I'm going to get into that later. Don't worry about that. But the number one question I got, and I get all the time, is why do we need to focus on the community, right? Like if I'm a church, the church should focus on the church members, right? I mean, that kind of makes sense, on an intellectual level, right? If I have a company, the company focuses on the employees, right? The members of the company. And so the question is always, why do we invest so much in the community? Why do we care about the community? And evangelism is some people's answer. It's not my answer, but it's some people's answer. I think that's too easy of an answer. Did you know they did a Pew poll a couple years ago? The number one reason that young people 18 to 35 are leaving the church, number one reason young people are leaving the church, and we don't have to take people off mute, we have to guess, is a lack of care for people outside of it. And what they surmise in this Pew poll is the number one reason people were leaving the church is that the church leaders' actions were not in step with their rhetoric. Right? Y'all understand what I'm saying? Is they would stand on the pulpit on Sunday morning and they would say, if someone is naked, clothe them. They'd give a great sermon about if someone is naked, clothe them. Or if someone is hungry, feed them. Or if someone is thirsty, give them something to drink. For him who doesn't have a tunic, take off your tunic and put it on him, right? They would give these sermons, and then the young people and the millennials would look and say, what is this clown talking about? Like, I hear it and that sounds great, but I don't see them doing that. And we have a word for that. We call that hypocrisy, and we call that hypocrites. And so you all, as millennials and young people, know that young people can't stand for hypocrisy, right? That's like a growing thing in our generation, is that we can stand up, we can tolerate a lot of different things, but one thing we can't tolerate is hypocrisy. And the reality is millennials these days are very cynical of the church because of that reason, because they hear one thing and they see something different. And the other reality is everyone is trying to sell something these days, right? If you go and you all have politicians in New York and New Jersey, very popular ones, they're always trying to sell you on something. They're trying to convince you that their way is the best way, that their politics is the best. Then you go to, a retail store, and they're trying to sell you through advertisements that their product is the best and their company is the best and their whatever is the best. And then, you go, everyone is trying to sell something, and that's made people very cynical when people's words don't match their actions. And so to me, it's very important that the church matches. When we preach about feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, giving food to those who are hungry and taking care of them, that our actions match up to it. That we can point to and say, I'm not just saying this, I'm actually doing it. And the other reason that I believe so much in investing in the community is I think it's what Jesus did. Okay, and a lot of people kind of sometimes can criticize and say, why are you putting all these resources there? Like, why don't we do more evangelism and ministry and whatever? And I go back to, I say that I think this is how Jesus served. And not I think, but I know. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is John chapter 9. Okay, it's the story of the man born blind. It's the story we read on the last Sunday of Lent, right before Palm Sunday and Easter. It's a beautiful story. You all know it. I won't read all 40 verses, okay, but you know the story. Man born blind, and he grows up, and they start giving him a hard time. They say, who is he? Who sinned, this man or his parents, and all these kind of things. And then Jesus heals him physically. And this is where you got to read. And I encourage you to go back and read it, kind of when you have some time. Go back and read it. Jesus meets this man, and they're giving him a hard time or whatever. And then he spits on the ground, makes clay with the saliva, and heals the man who had no eyes. And the man sees and glorifies God. And if you read the story, Jesus heals the man. And then, he does something weird. He goes away. You read it. It says he goes away. The man, you know nothing about the man except that he had no eyes. Jesus met him, and then he had eyes. And then you keep on reading the story, and I'm going to paraphrase, and it almost seems like Jesus leaves him and then is almost like tracking him, right? Like if you go and read it, the Pharisees give him a hard time, and they say, is this the guy who was born blind, or is this someone else? And they say, no way, how can this be? Like, who made? And they're giving him a hard time, and they're giving him trials and all these different things. And it's almost like Jesus every day is like, hey, whatever happened to that guy who was born blind? And they say, oh, the Pharisees are giving him a hard time. Jesus says, oh, okay. Then a couple of days later, hey, remember that guy that we healed? He had no eyes, then we did the eyes. Whatever happened to him? They say, oh, man, they are driving him and his parents crazy. You would not believe. Jesus, okay. Then finally he says, hey, that guy that we physically healed, whatever happened to him? The disciples say, you know what? You're not going to believe it. They kicked him out of the temple. They kicked him out of the city. Jesus says, no, we got to go find him. So John, you go here, and Peter, you go here, and Andrew, you go here. And they go find him. And then, if you read closely, it says Jesus, after he had found him, he begins a dialogue where he says, do you want to believe in the Son of Man? And the man says, who is he that I may believe? And Jesus says, it is he who you are speaking to. And he said, Lord, I believe. So physical healing came before spiritual healing. And I love that so much, because Jesus could have very easily said, okay, before I heal you physically, you got to know who I am. And let me get my megaphone and my baptism sheet. And then when I hear you believe in me, I'm going to then take care of you physically. Jesus said that's not how it works. That we take care of people's needs. We take care of people's physical needs. We take care of people's emotional needs. We take care of people's relational needs. And through that, they will come to the knowledge of Christ. And that to me was so eye-opening, because a lot of times we put a relationship with Christ or a relationship with his church over meeting the needs of those in need. Did y'all catch that? A lot of times we put the obstacle of a relationship with the church or a relationship with Christ as a prerequisite to meeting someone's physical, emotional, relational needs. And that is just not the example that Christ set. So as we were building the church here in 2012 at STSA, and again, I share kind of what I know. Like I said, by no means do we kind of have things figured out, but this is just kind of our experience. One of the things that we felt like is, in order to really put in this love for the community, in order to put in this investment in the community, we needed to write it into the fabric of the church and kind of weave it into everything about the church. And so we built it into the core values of the church. When we were coming up with the church, we created 10 core values that would define everything about the church, the mission of the church, everything about its direction and about its purpose. And the last core value was core value number 10, which was genuine love for the community, which said we bleed with love for those outside of the church. We don't just care about spiritual needs, but physical, emotional, and relational needs. And so this was really intended to fight against that culture which is not inclined to engage in the community. A culture which says, no, why don't we just put as much resources into the members of the church, into the people of the church. We wanted to put it into the mission of the church, into the core values of the church, to say, no, this is going to be part of our main mission. This isn't going to be a side gig. This isn't going to be something we do for extracurricular activity and brownie points or whatever. This is going to be an institutional part of our church. And so the question is, how does community service fit into the larger church mission? Okay. And again, everything I'm talking about, we'll get into specifics here in a minute, but I just kind of want to talk about the skeleton and the structure first, and then we can get into specifics about the current time of engaging the community currently. Because truthfully, when you're going to see this, it's very much specific to your community. So you can take what we do, but the whole point is that you need to connect with your local community and develop relationships and partnerships there and identify those needs in that community. And nobody can tell you what those are except for those who are in the community. So I kind of want to talk a little bit more general. What I've seen from churches that really invest in the community is there's really two models for investing in the community as a church. The first model is structuring it within the church ministries. And this is really the traditional model that many of us have really come from, right? Is I'm in a church and there are X number of ministries, right? There is a Sunday school ministry, there is a deacon ministry, there is a Orban ministry, there is a greeting, like there's all these different ministries, and there are people, servants in charge of each of the ministries, and they play a role in the church, right? Super straightforward, easy to understand. It's easy to access, right? It's easy to kind of comprehend. Is the community service is one component of the church ministries. What we found is that can be limiting in how and who you can serve, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean that when you approach it that way, really what you're telling people, think about it, what you're telling people is these 6 servants, they are in charge of reaching the community, right? Like think about it, for the deacons ministry, like I'm just looking at names here, Sylvia can't be in the deacons ministry because she's not on the deacons servant list, right? What we're telling Sylvia is you're great, and I'm sure Sylvia's great, but the deacons list is the deacons list. And if you're not on the list, you're not a part of that service. Is Sylvia about to say something?
Steve, you clearly don't know me, man.
I don't.
Part of every ministry. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. All of this applies to everyone but Sylvia. Okay. So same thing with Sunday. Same thing with Sunday school. Okay. Sylvia is the head of Sunday school. But if you're not on the Sunday school list, then you know what? I don't care about Sunday school. I'm not saying I don't wish it well and I don't, hope it's great. But the fact that I'm not a part of that ministry means I don't really, it doesn't jog like in my mind, like it's not something that's on my heart and something I'm actively thinking about, right? So that is limiting in and of itself. Really what you're telling your congregation as a leader is this is not for everyone. This is for a subset of the groups. That works for deacons and Sunday school teachers, right? Not everyone is meant to be a Sunday school teacher, right? They're studying, there's prerequisites, there's a learning that you have to go through. Same thing with deacons. There is a prerequisite as a deacon, right? Gender, whatever. Like there's certain things to be a deacon that it's not for everyone. That's why this model to me is less than optimal, because the way I look at it, and I think the way Jesus looks at it based on John chapter 9, is that this is for everyone, right? Like we don't have a taking communion ministry, because taking communion is for everyone. There's no such thing as like certain people are responsible. Like, no, everyone should take communion. We don't have I know we have greeting ministries, but really like everyone should make people feel hospitable. There's not a certain set of people that should say hi to newcomers or greet new people or whatever. So that to me limits who can serve. The second thing it limits is also how you can serve. And this, I'm just speaking very practical, and I know we're recording, but I just kind of share what's in my heart, is there are limitations in our American society for churches in service, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean, just as an institution, the American system is not set up to welcome churches in every aspect of life, right? Like a public school. Like, for example, we have a mentoring program where we mentor at-risk children in the public school system. We do that through the community service organization called Hope Multiplied. If I had ever approached them as STSA or St. Timothy or whatever you want to call it, we would have been rejected. There was no way we would be allowed to do that. Well, like another example is we throw a holiday party for kids with cancer and blood disorders from the hospital. I approached them as Hope. And so they were totally excited. And they specifically told me, it can't be a Christmas party. It has to be a holiday party to be inclusive of people who aren't Christian or don't celebrate Christmas or whatever. And so we do it as a holiday party as Hope. But now over time, you know, Abuna comes and they see the church and we talk about it. And now they're getting introduced to the church. But approaching them as the church is a very, very, very different methodology. And what it does is it really limits your opportunities. And again, that's not being tricky. I'm not saying you trick people into it. It's just taking advantage of the system that we live in. So to me, that's the less than optimal model. The second model is the independent model, which is where you have a separate entity from the church, a fully separate entity that is in charge or responsible for caring for the community, for the church. What do I mean by that? I mean, what we did in 2012 is we registered a nonprofit organization, a 501c3 nonprofit organization called Hope Multiplied. We registered it as a non-religious nonprofit organization. It's a community development organization. You can look at the tax records. You won't see STSA in any practical sense. It's an entity in and of itself. But at the same time, it's connected to the mission and vision of the church. So the way I describe it is at the 10,000 foot level, it's totally independent in terms of its operation, its human resources, its financial resources, its board structure, its registrations, everything is separate. But at the 100,000 foot level, it's completely connected in mission, connected in vision, connected in communication and strategic planning, and all of that is completely connected at that level, right? So when you're looking at a website, you're looking at an operation, you're looking at an administration, what do you see? Hope Multiplied. But then when we're in church or we're talking to our members, we say, we're going to serve the homeless community. We say, okay, who's we? Well, it doesn't matter. The church is going to serve the community, right? So there's an external messaging and then an internal messaging. The internal messaging is there's no difference. It's completely connected, the exact same thing. But the external, right? What you would see on Instagram, anybody go on Instagram, go on Hope's Instagram. Tell me what you see from STSA besides a flyer for Momentum. So it's totally separate. And the pros of that is again, it's taking advantage of the system that we live in, right? So now I can approach hospitals, schools, any public places, government officials, whatever. I can approach them as a pure nonprofit, as a totally independent organization, right? It opens the door for partnerships, which we're going to talk about here in a second, that are critically vital to reaching the community. It opens partnerships that you couldn't imagine from a church standpoint, right? And then the other thing, just very practically speaking, is funding. There's so many more opportunities for funding. So I'll just give you examples. So I'm sure many of you are young professionals in kind of corporate America. You probably have heard of like matching gifts programs, right? So where a Fortune 500 company like GE would have a matching gift program where they will match $1 for every dollar that an employee donates to a nonprofit organization, right? And so that is open to independent nonprofits. That's not open to religious organizations, right? 90% of the corporate Fortune 500 companies that have matching programs don't match to religious organizations and state that kind of unequivocally. So opportunities like that. The other thing is volunteer recruitment, right? So Hope as an entity has 250 active volunteers. So I'll even break that down for you. That mentor program I mentioned, we have a mentoring program for at-risk kids in 2 public schools here in Virginia. We mentor 60 kids. So we have 60 mentors and 60 kids in those 2 schools. I mean, in the chat, why don't we play a game? Guess how many of those are from STSA? Put a number. 0, 9, 5.
What was the number of total again?
60. Okay, so there's 0, 5, none, and then now we're getting into 30, 20, 10, okay? The people actually that are right were the first couple of people that put 0, 5, none. There's actually 6 STSA volunteers. We have 54 volunteers from the community. These are all people that reached out to us from our advertising and marketing in the community. We have put them through training and vetted them, and they go through our system, and now they are Hope volunteers. Okay, so I would imagine, you guys are very, very nice people, but I would imagine someone here is thinking of a question of how does evangelism play a role in what you're just saying, right? Because what I just kind of proposed to you, or just kind of threw out to you, is a model that really underplays evangelism and the church, right? So the question then, would you say, is, okay, then like where does evangelism play? My answer, and again, I'm just speaking from the heart, and again, what we do, like I said, everyone's kind of got their own opinions. My opinion is Hope is not in the business of evangelizing. Evangelism and service are 2 different things. And I believe the distinction between them needs to be made today more than ever, because evangelism, the way I believe it's done, is through relationships. Because I've never seen or been a fan of, or I've never seen the impact of standing on the street corner with the bullhorn and saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Maybe some people know how to do it. Maybe some people can do it better than I can. But I have never seen the value or the benefit to doing that. To me, evangelism, when I see the impact of evangelism, it comes from relationships. It comes from me getting to know you as a friend, as a confidant, as a mentor, as a mentee, as a whatever. And then through that personal relationship, now engaging you into the church, sharing my experience of Christianity, of the Orthodox Church, of whatever. But I can't do that before the personal relationship is there. And the problem when we mix evangelism and service is, like I said at the beginning, people are very cynical in our world, especially people in need. So when we begin to mix the 2, we begin to conflate what service is and what evangelism is. And what we create is a cynicism in the people that we serve, where, is this person helping me only so I can join his church? Is this person caring for me only so that I can jump into the baptistry, right? And so one of the core values at Hope that like drill into all of our volunteers is love with no strings attached. And that to me is the most important thing that you can do in service. Because like I said, people are so cynical that the most powerful thing you can do is love someone and expect expect nothing in return. And that to me is the goal of Hope, is to go into a community, to love them more than they have ever been loved before, to care for them more than they have ever been cared before, and to take care of every one of their physical, emotional, relational needs. And if from that relationships happen where they ask me, hey, why are you doing this? Hey, what is the motivation behind this? Why are you spending all day with me? Why are you investing so much in me? Why this? Why that? Then is my opportunity to share my motivation, which my motivation is because Christ loved me, because he first loved me, therefore I love them. But I don't have any prerequisite on volunteering with Hope. Is you don't have to be Christian, you don't have to know your Bible, you don't have to be baptized. All you need to do is to be able to love someone with no strings attached. All you need to be able to do is to serve someone and expect nothing in return. And that to me is a service organization. That to me is the church going into the community and loving people with no strings attached. And, you know, there's a lot of people here that are much smarter than me, but the cynicism of those in need, of people, I talk to people, like I said, I live in Washington. We were laughing before, you know, I know not everyone was on. Me and Mina were talking about being in DC, and every single day I get to talk to people in the streets and people in need. And the cynicism, every time you go to help someone, when you hand them, you know, a cup of water, hey, like, what's the catch? What do you want now? Like, what do you need? Like, what do I got to do now? And you know what I realized is the biggest perpetrators of the loving with strings attached can be us. And historically has been us, the Christian church, right? And so we have a lot of institutional work that needs to be, you know, I'm kind of choosing my words carefully, but work that needs to be undone, I would say, in removing those strings and saying, hey, we love and we don't care what you are. We don't care what you do. We don't care about anything but serving and meeting your needs. The same way Jesus, and again, Jesus was omniscient, right? So he knew, so not really fair. But the same way he walked away from that man born blind and said, I don't want nothing from you. Like, okay, now you got to bow down and worship. No, you're not bow down and worship me. I'm taking care of you. And I'm going to walk away from you, and I'm going to make sure that you feel loved. And that, to me, is really where service begins in the community.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How has that, you talked a little bit about the disassociation between the organization and the church, but in a way, you know, it's still part of the same mission at the end of the day. How has that affected how people view the church in the community, right? Like, do they associate the group with the church, or do they now think it's the same thing? Or like, how is the church viewed in the community based on this kind of methodology?
Yeah, what I would say is, so when Hope begins a program, like I said, we approach it as Hope Multiplied, right? And we go there and there's very little about the church. But then over time, as relationships get built, which I was talking about, the personal relationships, and I don't mean just personal relationships with those in need, I mean personal relationships even with our partners, right? There becomes this you know, engagement where, like, I'll give you an example just to kind of make it practical. We have a great relationship with the hospital here. So we created a pediatric mobile health clinic to provide access for healthcare for kids here east of the river, which a very poor neighborhood here in DC. And so we partner with the local children's hospital here, one of the largest children's hospitals in the world, to operate the clinic. And so initially when we approached them, it was all Hope Multiplied. It was, you know, very much the nonprofit. We were working on the project. And over time, me and the CEO of this children's hospital, one of the 10 most powerful people here in DC, have become such good friends that he comes and speaks at our gala, right? And so our gala, my brother's there, all the priests of STSA are there. STSA is one of the sponsors. So he's getting to see STSA's involvement in Hope, right? And then, we meet on a quarterly basis. Every time we meet, he'll bring up the church and say, hey, what's the church doing, whatever. So yeah, on the outset, how do they view the church? They have no idea, right? It's Hope multiplied on the outset. But one of my job, part of my job description is to cultivate these relationships so that they get introduced to the church, right? And when they meet the church, what are they meeting? They're not meeting just some random church on the corner. They're not just meeting some, ancient apostolic church that's great. No, they're meeting the church that's behind the great work that they've witnessed firsthand. It's so much more powerful than here's the church, right? On the front end of it. So I hope that answered it.
Yeah, no,
I have another question.
Please.
And I'm gonna play the devil's advocate.
Sure.
And I agree, I come 100% with the idea of loving with no strings attached. 100%. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
But and I understand the idea of building a relationship with the people before you evangelize. But the example that you gave about the poor blind man and Jesus healing him physically first, at the end he met him in the temple and he healed him spiritually. So there is an ultimate spiritual goal, but it was taken maybe through the healing first of the body. And this is not the only example. When we were talking, I was thinking also of the paralytic person in John 5. He healed him actually. I told him, go and carry your bed and walk. So he healed him physically first. But there is always the vision or the goal of healing him spiritually. My question is, I don't know if that's what you have in mind. As I'm getting the feeling that the idea of building a relationship, it might not come this relationship. And you are lucky maybe that you build a relationship with the CEO of the hospital. But what if you don't build this relationship? And again, along the same question, what is the difference between this model, the second model that you're talking about, and like a very social organization who is helping everybody who's poor or needy or something like that? My vision always, and it's good, definitely it's very important to meet the need of the people. Like you should have like maybe a verse here and there, or when we do a homeless drive, for example, we put sandwiches and in the bag we put a verse. We don't want anything from them. It's not like we are trying to bring them to our church, but you are trying to through God's word one way or another.
Yeah. No. I appreciate that.
Understand my point, right?
Absolutely. And you're 100% right. The ultimate goal, and let's just make it clear, the ultimate goal is to introduce everyone to the truth, right? Is kind of what Dr. Samir said, is to introduce everyone to the truth. Now, what I would say at STSA is the kind of how we do that, every part plays a different role in that, right? And so, the way we do it, we have something called the well, which some of you might be familiar with, which is kind of that introductory step to the church. And so ideally, Hope is taking care of those in the community and then, building those relationships that those people may get invited to the well, where they would be introduced to the church. So it's kind of a multi-phased approach, right? So we don't try to do everything all at the exact same time, right? We kind of split it up. And so I think it's the same thing, is that, if you go give a sandwich to someone and put a verse, I think it's the same principle as me sharing why I'm here today to give you a sandwich, right? It's just kind of the mechanics of it. But what we've seen just from a practical standpoint is when it's more overt and kind of in kind of, in someone's face or whatever, and in a nice way, but when it's more overt, it can jeopardize the service aspect of it. And so my job is to care for the service aspect of it. And that's why I always want to protect that, to make sure that our motives are clear, that we're not just so if they don't come to church, I still need to serve them, if that makes sense. That my ultimate goal is not for them to come to church and that's why I serve them. It's to serve them because Jesus commanded us to serve them. And then hopefully through a relationship, they enter into the knowledge of the truth kind of thing. I hope that kind of expounded a little bit on kind of what you're saying, but I agree with you 100%. We're moving everyone towards that.
Thank you.
My pleasure. So then let's talk a little bit about kind of where do you begin, right? If I'm a person or a church that's never done anything in the community, where would I start? And I know you guys are all doing, I know you guys do great work in the community, but where did we start when we were kind of coming up with this? And the one word that I kept on coming back to when we were kind of developing this was strategy, right? And strategic vision. We always talk about strategic vision because I came from a community that had the best intentions in the world and wanted to turn the world upside down, as it says in the book of Acts. But everything that related to the community service aspect was so haphazard. Okay, it was, what are you feeling today? Well, I feel like going to the homeless. Okay, let's jump in the cars and go to the homeless. What do you feel like today? I feel like finding some sick kids. Okay, let's go find some sick kids, whatever. So it's like, it was very much, and again, it's not anyone's fault. It's just, that was kind of, we were doing the best we could with what we had. And so there was never a strategic vision for reaching the community. And so when we started Hope, we took the opposite kind of course. What we did is we basically said, we are going to strategically approach the community, and we are going to be needs-based, not expertise-based. What do I mean by that? Expertise-based says we are really, really good at, building homeless shelters, right? And so we are going to go, this is what a lot of nonprofits do, and some Christian nonprofits. We are going to go into every neighborhood in Washington, D.C., and we are going to build the greatest homeless shelters that have ever been created on the face of the earth. And they go in there, and of course, they've only been in this neighborhood for all of 2 minutes. They don't know anybody, never talk to anybody. And what do they look around? They find there's not a single homeless person. But yet there's so many people who are hungry. So many people who are mentally, need mental psychology and things like that. And so their expertise, everything they were doing was based on their expertise, but they weren't focused on the need, right? And so it was almost, there's a lot of talk about this white savior complex, which there's been a lot in the news about this idea of kind of this white savior complex of just going into a community that you've been in for all of 2 minutes, have never invested in, have never spoken to anyone on the ground, and then telling people what they need. We said we were going to do the opposite. So what we did is we went into neighborhoods here in Washington, D.C., and we met with community leaders, nonprofit organizations, schools, hospitals, anybody that had a voice, anybody that was anybody in that community. We met with them. We did needs assessments. We did feasibility assessments. We would talk to different people, and we would say, give us the biggest needs you have, right? Tell us who is here, what are their needs, and how can we help? And I promise you, that is one of the most powerful things you can do, is before you lift a finger, you connect with people and you listen. Listening is something that is very, very underrated when it comes to service, okay? And we tend to do, and we don't listen as much. And so we started listening and saying, okay, these are some of your needs. We came up with actually the 5 or 6 largest needs in the different neighborhoods. And then we started developing programs to meet those needs. And every program that was developed was based on a need or a top need that had come out of these needs assessments, these interviews with public officials and government leaders and nonprofit organizations and things like that. And so, you know, people always ask, what does hope do? And I always say what hope does is very much dependent on where we serve, because we don't just do one thing, because people's needs are not just one thing. It's not you know, this kind of monolithic you know, population. And so, you know, in Arlington here in Virginia, I'm using cities you may not be familiar with, but Arlington is a little bit more affluent community than some of the neighborhoods in Washington. So what do we do there? We do a lot of at-risk mentoring for at-risk kids, like I was talking about, the mentoring program. We do a reading program for kids who are not reading at grade level. So it's a lot more academic kind of support for that group, as opposed to in Anacostia, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the country. It's much more on, you know, the basic kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those basic necessities, right? Food, you know, clothing. That's where we operate the mobile health clinic, provide access to healthcare. We also have a program which provides food for kids who don't have access to food during school closures, which we started this program in September, and then COVID-19 hit and it became the epicenter of the pandemic, and everyone, you know, started getting on this. And so, you know, finally we got something right, you know, after all these years. So, you know, we go into these communities and you identify the need and you talk to people and you touch people, right? Not during COVID, right? 6 feet, but you connect with people, right? And there's something so powerful with walking into a neighborhood that you know nothing about, right? I hope I don't offend anyone here, but everyone here, I would bet, is in an upper middle class family, right? Or is in some, you know, a form of that. So we are trying to serve communities that we are not a part of. And that's okay, as long as we understand that there's a lot of cynicism there. And so we need to approach it with humility, going and saying, hey, we're here to serve. I want to listen to you.
Yeah.
I want to connect with you, right? And so in doing that, there's a couple advantages. The first one is you identify the need, right? That you kind of hit that target and you're able to kind of serve in a very strategic, effective way. The second thing, which is another pillar about this, the biggest advantage of that is you create partnerships, right? And you know, we laugh, and I joke around a lot, so, you know, forgive me if I say anything, but, you know, we laugh about like the Coptic church. You know how churches grow in the Coptic world is if I get into a disagreement with someone, I just go next door and I start a church, right? And I'm totally not. I'm not making light of that.
That's our church planting right there.
Right? Like that's kind of, and I totally get it. You know, it's an immigrant population and it's a very territorial thing. And I totally get that. And that's very normal. But there is something beautiful. And I really think that this second generation, I mean, God, our parents and those who have come before us, people like Dr. Samir, I mean, blood, sweat, and tears building this church that we have now. But this next generation has to be more focused on building partnerships than doing it alone.
Yeah.
Has to be more focused on being reaching out, as opposed to having this territorialness of this is my territory, this is my piece of the pie, this is my service, you go do your own thing, and you go find something else, right? We have to reach out and say, I may not agree with everything you're doing, but we can partner together in this area, right? And so building those partnerships in the community are so powerful, right? Like I said, we have partnerships with the second largest children's hospital in the United States, Children's National, where they see us now as an entrenched member of the community. They see us as a valuable member. The amount of benefit that I can't tell you, the amount of benefit that comes with that kind of partnership. With the public school system, right? Having that partnership where if they have a need, they come to us because they trust us. They've seen our work, right? And so building these partnerships is so powerful. The other thing that's important.
Can I ask you a question, just because we're rounding up on time?
Sorry, I talk forever.
Just one thing I definitely would love for you to answer for us is, you're doing this under Hope Multiplied. And I think a lot of what you talked about is definitely applicable. But when we're talking about building partnerships as under the church, right? Not necessarily creating another entity outside of the church, but under the church itself. How do we go about that in a strategic way, which they will be accepting to?
I think it can absolutely be done as a church. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it has to be done that way. I think it's less important what you take and what you approach them with, as opposed to how you approach. Right. So if you go as the Queen's Church, but you go with humility, with understanding, with the idea of connecting and listening before anything, of course they're gonna love. I mean, some of the most impactful organizations are churches in these communities, right? Some of these African American churches are doing, more service in these neighborhoods than we'll ever do, right? So these people are not intolerant of the church. Right. I think it's all about how you approach it. And the important thing with building partnerships is the last thing you want to do is go to a community and step on someone's toes and disrespect an organization that's been there and that's planted there and doing the work. And then we come in and say, okay, we've got all the answers, like the Coptic churches here. Like that's the last thing kind of we want to do. So the last thing I'll say, I know I talked for a long time and I apologize. But like Dr. Samir said, is like, where does the church fit into this, right? I talked a lot about hope, but to me, in my heart, the church is the people, right? The church is not the building, or the church is not the registered entity or whatever. The church is the people. So when the people have this heart of service, when the people have this desire to go into communities, that's when the church gets spotlighted. That's when the church and the truth of the church is heard. And to me, the relationships that are formed through, and again, the reason I kind of hinge on relationships is because relationships require a regular investment. And that to me is the key, is if a church goes in there, and again, be careful, because we are living in, and again, I'm saying this to myself first and foremost, is we are living in times where it's very, very easy. I look on Instagram, everybody's protesting. What do? Let's go join them. Go protest. And then the week after, everyone else is talking about COVID. Okay, forget about the protest. Like, who cares about that? We're on to something else. We're back on the COVID. Okay, well now COVID's, we got a vaccine. Now we're on, the people that are going to have an impact are the people that are going to, day in and day out, create programs and create regular opportunities to go into these communities and invest when it's not on Instagram, when it's not a Blackout Tuesday, when it's not any of these things. Okay, that to me is the church, is not going in once every 6 months or once when someone dies this way or that way or whatever, is going into these neighborhoods and investing day in and day out. And that's where the church is going to make an impact. I see a question here that I missed. Would you say the first model you described would work in a church setting, as in with a church member is not necessarily with the community? I kind of just touched on that, Myrna, just a little bit. I would say it absolutely can work. Again, registering a nonprofit, that's a lot of work. And so I'm not saying that's the only way. That's certainly, that first model can absolutely work here's the if the church leadership and the church culture is invested in pushing everyone to the community and making sure that everyone knows that this is not isolated to these group of people, that this is part of our core values. I'll give you an example, something we did a couple months ago. At the Well, I will speak, 3-4 times a year. And sometimes I'll speak about hope, sometimes I'll speak about something different. But one of the ideas that we talked about was basically dedicating a month to community engagement, right? And so every week we would talk about a different aspect of the community engagement. And even on top of that, one of the ideas was taking all of the donations that were collected on a Sunday, right? If you pass out the collection plate, which I don't know if any churches still do that, but if all the donations for that Sunday would go directly to the community, into the community programs. Because is that about the money? No, I don't care about the money. What it's really about is the church leadership saying, this is critical to the success of our church, to the mission of our church. And we are willing to give time and investment and put resources into the community. So it doesn't matter if it's Hope or, whatever. I really think it needs to come from the top down. Thank you, Verena. How can we as servants of the church inspire each other and other members of the church to keep the fire of the community engagement going? That's a good question. If you figure out the answer to that, let me know. Listen, like I said, I think it starts from the leadership. And I think it's very much a come and see approach. When Jesus told Nathanael, come and see. I think when you, as leaders, are setting the example, and not just setting the example, but showing people this is the most fun you're ever going to have in a church setting, is rolling up your sleeves and connecting with people, then I think that kind of really sparks people and energizes people. I think, the opposite is true. And we unfortunately sometimes see the opposite is when, the leadership and whatever says, no, like that, if you have extra time, go and serve in the community. Like, don't miss your primary service for that kind of thing. And we see the effect of that, right? We see people that in churches that, don't have that much of a reach in the community because of it. And so I think as servants, as young leaders in the church, it's incumbent on everyone to really inspire each other for it. And I think a part of that is also creating programs and opportunities that show people the impact, right? And so, Verena, if you, organize an event, which, and again, if you did this, forgive me, but you go, I'm going to go to the corner of the street with the bullhorn and say, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. People show up and nobody repented because the kingdom of heaven is not at hand in their eyes. Well, the people would look at that and say, I don't know if this is really for me. But if you create an event or a program and people see, hey, this guy was hungry when he approached, and now he's walking away not hungry, and he's, a totally different person, people are going to say that's the impact, right? People are going to be moved when they see the impact, right? One of the first events we ever did was a holiday party for kids with cancer and blood disorder, right? I mentioned that earlier. We threw this big holiday party. We had like 100 kids come out, and, we did face painting and Santa and music and all these things. And actually some people from New York came in. So it's this big event, and people come who've never served before, and they see the smiles on the children's faces. And it's like intoxicating, right? I want more of it. When you get that experience, it's that come and see approach. They have to experience it. And we as leaders have to experience it first. And then once you get a taste of it, you're going to want more of it. I'm sure of it.
Can I have another question?
Please. Please. I'm embarrassed that you're asking questions that you should be answering them, not asking them.
This one is going to hate me.
No.
From your personal experience, whether with Hope or generally speaking, what are the percentage of people that you serve through the organization? They seek God one time or another. They seek God one time or another.
They seek. Say that again.
They seek God.
How many conversions you got?
La. I'm not talking. I'm not talking about conversion. I'm not talking about conversion.
Sorry.
People who become interested in the vision, and of ultimately seeking God. That I cannot accept it. That's okay. That's seeking God. I'm not even saying going to church. Seeking God is that God interested in asking you about your faith or your belief or why you're doing this. This is what he said in the very beginning. I'm just curious to see. No.
I'll answer that. I'll give you some real numbers, but I'll answer it So I'll give you a couple different levels, right? So I, as the executive, have relationships with, let's say approximately 10 partners, right, at my level, right? So in my relationships, of those 10 partners, right, how many have walked through the doors of STSA? Probably 6, and attended the well. Now, again, and you may be taking a step further, what did they do with that? I have no idea what they did with it. Some came back a second time, some came back a third time, some didn't come back at all. That's kind of outside of my purview, right? But then the other thing I'll say is, remember I was telling you we have 6 mentors from STSA, we have 54 non-mentors. Would you believe that probably 20 of the 54 mentors have also come to the well because of the 6 mentors? And that to me is the relationship building that I was talking about. It's actually not the relationship building of the volunteer to the person in need, it's the volunteers together. And that's why it's so important to me to take volunteers from the community, because that's where the relationships are built. And so I don't know if that really answered your question, but at least it's statistics we keep of those that take that one step of the community to walking through the door of the church. Now, again, if my brother preaches a bad sermon, that's on him, okay? And they don't want to come back, okay? That's on him, okay? But I hope that answers.
Actually, thank you very much. That's really amazing.
Sure.
So you're not going soon, so we got a couple more questions.
Sure.
He doesn't preach bad servants, Melody says, just FYI.
I'll take Dr. Samir over my brother any day, okay?
Mina Yusuf says, what steps would you recommend for implementing a change within the church?
I'm a big fan of your brother, by the way.
Thank you. Steps to recommend implementing a change within the church. Look, I appreciate the question. Thank you, Mina. Sometimes moving the church, right, an institution that is ancient and historic, and it's kind of like moving an elephant, right? It's like moving an elephant, right? If you're looking for overnight change, you're in the wrong church, and that's a good thing. And we're all going to grow up to say, thank God the church doesn't, blow with the winds and, run to and fro with the winds, right? Thank God. But if you're asking for how to change the church, I think it's changing the culture, right? Little by little. What do I mean by that? I mean, maybe instead of doing an additional sermon series on praying the Agpeya, which is very, very important and everyone should do it, and I'm not saying nothing about nothing, but maybe instead of doing 4 sermon series on that, doing 3 on that, and then 1 on reaching your community, right? I know it sounds crazy. It's crazy, but I'm saying maybe just 1, right? That's a little change. Maybe, if there's a regular youth meeting, which I know we're not doing a lot of meetings in person these days, but if there's a regular meeting, maybe, once a month doing a service of that. I know that doesn't seem like a lot or whatever, but you're changing the culture little by little, right? You're moving it in a direction where people are starting to get more invested in the community. And again, I point back to the leadership, and I'm not saying anything in a bad way. I'm just saying, think about the priorities of the church. Where did the current priorities of the church come from? It came from the leadership standing on a pulpit every Sunday saying, this is important. This is important, right? So if we want to change that, then we need to change the messaging, right? We need to change, the focus of things. And it's not a better or worse. It's not, we should be focusing, we can do it all. The church can do it all. The church is a perfect entity. It's obviously, we are imperfect people who run it, but the church is a perfect entity, and it has everything inside of it, right? And the beauty of it kind of runs very deep. And so I think it's little by little changing the culture from within, starting with the leadership and then drilling down, kind of a top-down approach. I hope that answered it, Mina.
Steve, just one thing.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
Steve, just one thing I'll add is to your point, like a lot of it is a personal decision, right? A lot of the service that was initially started at STSA was inspiration from a group of people or like individuals themselves that took it upon themselves to really make this an initiative and a priority. So to Verena and Mina's point, I think a lot of time it's on us, right? Like if we're going to be committed and we're going to be there, you know, day in, day out, no matter how many people show up, no matter who's there, right? Like then things start really, you know, changing and becomes this thing that becomes a movement. It doesn't just start organically. It starts by a choice that somebody's making.
Absolutely. I think when people see strategic vision and they see actual needs being met, they will absolutely gravitate towards that. I have no doubt.
Any other questions, guys? These were actually really fantastic questions, so thank you for. All right, I think with that, I think we'll give Steve some time with his family back. Now, Steve, we want to thank you so much for taking the time. Like this was great. Like thoroughly engaging, something that we really all needed. You know, you got us all chatting, which is great. And you gave us a lot to think about in terms of like what we can really do in our community, in our church, and how we move forward to really better, you know, society as a whole.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And like I said, I you know, when I say we build partnerships and like we're here to help, we're here to help. And so if there is anything that we can do, like I said, we don't have a lot of answers, but the little that we do have, we're happy to share and kind of, you know, just kind of share our experiences. But certainly this is something on my heart. And so if anyone, you know, has any questions or needs any help, please feel free to reach out. Mina's got my info and stuff.